Okay, we are going through the whole Bible, and we're trying to do it in a year, and we're doing it at 230 miles an hour as we drive past all of the sights to see. And we're in the book of Nehemiah. So being in the book of Nehemiah means that we are in one of the 12 books of history in the Old Testament. And so these history books are, to repeat it again, because we'll only be doing it one more time, in being in the history books. It starts with Joshua conquering the land, and then it moves to Judges, 400 years of them trying to live on the straight and narrow and having problems and trouble time after time after time. We enter into the time of Samuel, and Samuel becomes a time where they're sort of directed by the prophets and where they begin to be ruled by kings. So you have the prophets and the kings in 1st and 2nd Samuel. And this becomes the story of King Saul and the story of King David. It moves on to 1st and 2nd Kings. It becomes the story of Solomon. Moving on from Solomon in 1st and 2nd Kings, you find the division of the kingdom. There's those that move to the north, the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes. There's the southern kingdom, Judah, down in the south. Civil war, they're living differently. Then you get into 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which tells you about the kings of the south and how they were mostly good, and it gives the good stories, but they're all declining. The kingdom in the north gets conquered eventually by Assyria and falls. They eventually, as they intermarry up there after being conquered by the Assyrians, they become known as Samaritans, sort of mixed breeds. The Jewish people, the family of Abraham, but mixing in with the other nations. The southern kingdom doesn't like that. So the southern kingdom continues. 150 years later, the southern kingdom, it also declines, and it falls to Babylon. And when it falls to Babylon, they go into exile to Babylon. And while they're there, Persia rises up as a superpower, world governing empire, and conquers Babylon. So the Jews who were left over in Babylon, they're now underneath the rule of Persia. Well, one of the things that happens is that they start to come back, and it's the Persian kings that are encouraging them to go back. And there were prophecies about these Persian kings that they would tell the people to go back, and they would encourage the people to go back, and they would help them. And so we see they're going back. Well, they're going back, and we saw the book of Ezra where they go back and they make some sacrifices, and then they begin to build the temple. And then we get to the book of Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah is serving in the court of the king. And as he's serving in the court of the king, his brother comes from Jerusalem. And Nehemiah is going to be about going to Jerusalem and helping to rebuild the walls of the city that have all fallen down. Let's start the book, Nehemiah. So this is post-exile. They've come back. They're in a bad way. They've sort of trickled back, dribbled back into the land, and they're putting it together, but it's a tough row to hoe. So Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1. The words of Nehemiah. In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hananiah, one of my brothers, came from Judah with other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. And they said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. Jerusalem, great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is all broken down. The gates have been burned with fire. It's a mess. When I heard these things, I sat down and I wept and I mourned and I fasted and I prayed to the God of heaven and I asked if God would help me. And then he goes on, and the thing that he says in the last sentence in verse 11 is, I was the cupbearer to the king, the one who would bring the wine to the king, and probably he would taste the wine to see if it was poisoned or not. Well, Chapter 2, what happens is he has an opportunity. He looks all bummed out, and the king says, man, you look all bummed out. I've never seen you all bummed out. What's going on? And he said, why shouldn't I be bummed out when my people in my city, Jerusalem, my heritage, when it's a mess, it's in disgrace, and my brothers told me about it, and oh man, I wish it was something I could do. And the king said, what do you want me to do? What do you want to do? He said, I want to go back to Jerusalem and I want to help rebuild that city. I want to help rebuild those walls. And the king said, I will help you. The king said, I will help you. And he sends Nehemiah there with protection and with letters and with things to do. And so Nehemiah goes back. As he goes into the city, it says that he's riding on his mount, riding on a horse, and he's looking at the wall, and he says, I didn't tell anyone what God had put in my heart to do. He had a vision. He had a vision of what was going to happen, what the wall was going to look like, what the whole city was going to look like again. And he begins to find the builders of the wall. And he begins to put people, whoever they were, by families. He has the jewelers, the jewelers who would work with their fingers with tiny little things. He has them out there building the wall. He has a guy out there that's with his daughters out there building the wall. People who lived in a certain part of town, out in front of their houses, they're building the wall. But then it said the nobles, they wouldn't put their shoulder to the wall. All these people who thought they were better than that. Well, he ends up building the wall, but there's a lot of opposition. There's an awful lot of opposition. There's always been opposition to the Jews. And Nehemiah, he helps the poor. In verse 6, there's more opposition to rebuilding. And you get to chapter 7, and he gives a list of the exiles that had come, the exiles that had returned. Gives their names. Chapter 8, an amazing thing happens. We had just done the book of Ezra. Well, an amazing thing happens in chapter 8 that Ezra, the scribe and the priest, you see, the scribe, he copied the words, he copied the books. He is now going to stand up and he's going to teach the word of God to the people. Chapter 8, when the 7th month came and the Israelites had settled in their towns, they all came together in a place called the Watergate. He told Ezra, the teacher of the law, to bring out the book of the law of Moses, which he had commanded for Israel. And on the first day of the month, Ezra the priest brought the law before the assembly, which was made up of men and women and all who could understand, and he read it aloud. He read it aloud from daybreak till noon, and he faced the square before the Watergate in the presence of the men, the women, and others who could understand, and they all listened attentively to the book of the law. Ezra stood on this pulpit that they had made for him, this platform. He opened the book and the people could see him standing there. He praised the Lord and he read the book of the law to them. A little revival going on. Chapter 9, the people are confessing their sins. Chapter 10, he gives the names of some more of the people, some more of the leaders that are there. It talks about the new residents of Jerusalem, the priests and the Levites. But Nehemiah is sort of interesting in that he finishes his task and he goes back, really. He's not called to a lifetime thing. He was just called to do this. And so the book of Nehemiah, where Nehemiah comes back, mobilizes the people, has the vision to mobilize the people, and he builds the wall, and he builds the wall in record time. Because all of those who are opposing the work, they said, this will never get done. And Nehemiah puts himself to the task and gets it done in record time, and everybody is amazed at what God has done through this guy, Nehemiah. And then it goes on with some more reforms that he does and just trying to make the city of God again. Well, it's nothing like it was, but it's a whole lot better after Nehemiah has gotten involved. And so there we have Ezra, Nehemiah. We will look at Esther next, and that will finish our historical books. Nehemiah coming back to work with the people and to build that wall. And he built it. Hey, bless you guys. We'll continue on.